Generally, I'll take silence and the absence of raised hands to mean yes, so I trust that everyone can see and hear me. And you'll see that a recording has been started. I'll come on to what that means in a second. So many, if not all of you, will be familiar with the format of these hearings, and my aim here is to replicate virtually as closely as possible what we would have done were we all together in the room. So first of all, thank you for everyone for being here, for the work in particular that's been put in to arranging these virtual hearings, for participating, and in advance for everyone's patience during proceedings. I think there may be a little bit of toing and froing, but we'll get there. So I'm Tom Bristow, the inspector appointed by the Secretary of State to conduct the examination and to ultimately prepare a report with recommendations to the Council. This morning, today, the discussion will be structured around paragraphs 8 to 26 of examination document INSP 5B. That's the agendas and where I've set out some matters for discussion. I hope that is what everyone is here for. Let me know if that's not the case. I will try and speak plainly and explain any acronyms or terms that I use, but where I say things like INSP 5B and the like, those are generally examination documents hosted on the examination website. Now that website is hosted by the Council, but it's maintained by the Programme Officer, Kerry Truman. Kerry, are you okay just to show everyone your face briefly? Okay, or not. Anyway, you'll see that Kerry Truman is in the meeting, and she is generally the first port of call for any... oh, there we are. Thank you, Kerry. There we are. She's generally the first port of call for any queries. Thank you. So given the time that we have been at examination and the things that have occurred during that time, setting aside the obvious, there are a number of additional documents on the examination website to which we will make reference. It may be useful to have that, therefore, in front of you as we go. On that note, I accept that things are somewhat complex, inevitably with plans, and that point came through the additional recent consultation the Council ran. So that is just to mention, please do say or interject if ever we're talking about things that are unclear, or if I can help, or indeed the Council can help explain things. The aim of these hearing sessions is to give everyone the opportunity to have their say on relevant matters and to ensure I have the information that I need. So first, let's do some housekeeping. For reference, we are now at paragraph 8 of INSP 5B, that examination document. There's guidance, I just bring everyone's attention on the examination website to virtual hearings and to data privacy, both specific to this examination and in general, those document references, if anyone hasn't had a look at them, and I would encourage everyone to have a look at them, are INSP 22, INSP 23 and INSP 24. So in terms of the structure, the hearings will be an informal discussion led by me on specific matters. I will generally, as I would have done in a physical hearing, summarise what I see to be the key issues and invite comments from various parties to get to the crux of the matter and ensure we make best use of our time. On the agenda or the matters for today, I have indicated who has raised particular points. No one's obliged to participate, there's not a classroom, but hopefully that gives some structure to who I will invite if they would wish to comment on things. Equally, if you do want to say something and I haven't identified you in that document in INSP 5B, please use the raise hand function on Teams, which has already been used. That on the toolbar, which may appear differently on all of your screens, is the palm symbol. I can see the order in which, I think I can see the order in which hands are raised, so I will get round to you, even if not immediately. Can I just ask, is anyone joining via telephone? Has anyone dialed in as opposed to using Microsoft Teams? Okay, that keeps things a little bit easier, as there are some intricacies with raising hands through that process. I'd just say that all questions or points should be put to me in the first instance, rather than any form of cross-examination. I'll then determine whether or what further discussion or information is needed. That leads me on to briefly go through how Microsoft Teams functions. I'm sure many of you will be familiar with this. First to mention, as there was some discussion at the start, this is being live streamed on the council's YouTube channel. So I suspect some people will be tuning in there. That there's a slight lag, but effectively that is a live streaming process. That will be available for a short period of time. Via Teams, the hearing is also being recorded, and that will be retained until the close of the examination process. Again, information on data privacy is all on the examination website. With that in mind, please can I ask everyone to be mindful not to share any personal information, whether that's your personal information or that of others, and whether that's verbally or by holding up things to be seen on the camera, etc. I see everyone has turned your camera off. That's entirely up to you if you do. You may wish, when you speak, to turn your camera on, or to obscure your background with something appropriate, of course. But please do at least let me know who you are when you speak. I will generally keep my camera on, distracting as it may be for me. But whether or not you do so is entirely up to you. As everyone has done, it looks like everyone has read the guidance. Thank you very much. If you mute your connection when you're not speaking, that's very helpful. It minimizes background noise and distraction. Remember to unmute yourself when you speak. In terms of timings, I'm planning on having a short break around 11 and to conclude this session around 1. There's inevitably some flexibility in timings. Now, the council can correct me if this is wrong, but during breaks, could I ask you not to leave the session? So that's do not press the red leave or disconnect button, as that will take you out of proceedings. But if you simply mute your microphone and camera, and I will say when we will come back, when the adjournment is over. When we get to the end of the session, that's the time to disconnect. Is that correct? Have I got that right?
Yes, so you can do it that way, because people can leave the meeting and rejoin, so there won't be a problem. They can rejoin the meeting if they accidentally hit the red button. Sure.
Yeah, and I think that's an important point. I mean, you can leave at any time if you've sort of made your point or heard enough, and it won't disrupt other proceedings. It's not like a conference call. Thank you. So we won't be. There is a chat function, various emojis, and there is a share screen function via Teams. We won't be using any of those, although I might share my screen if there's a particular document that I want to refer to from time to time. But we generally won't be using the share screen facility, and we won't be using the chat facility. If you do happen to say anything on the chat facility, I won't look at it. As you've seen so far, I may, of course, look around at other documents on my screen and to write some notes, etc. I'm sorry if that makes things a little bit impersonal. I will try and maintain as much eye contact as possible. So don't be offended. If you see me looking around, I will be listening. There may be, although it seems to have worked very well so far, occasional technical issues. The programme officer, Kerry Truman, and the council are helpfully here to assist as far as they're able in that respect. So if I can just pause at this stage and ask if there are any questions or points to raise, and Kerry.
Yes, thank you, Inspector. One of our participants, Mr. John Winter, is having trouble viewing. I understand, I've spoken to him on the phone, he can hear us, but he can't see us. So I'm just trying to ask if Trudy could perhaps assist us in assisting him. He seems to have moved away from his desk right now. I did say that I would get back in touch with him, but he did confirm he could hear, Inspector, but he can't actually see. Oh, here he is.
Okay. Well, thank you. And I think that just underscores the point that there's a lot of work in the background to ensure everyone can access things. Mr. Winter, can you hear us?
I'm doing it. Yeah.
Mr. Winter, are you there?
Yeah, he's asking about the RAM because.
Kerry, have you got John's number, but it would suggest that his camera's not on. Or, mind you, we can see him. Or if you can unmute him. He can't unmute. We can't unmute him, actually, can we? Oh, God, okay. Have you got his number? Can you email his number? Oh, I think you emailed those yesterday, didn't you?
Okay.
I've got, Trudy, I do have his telephone number. I've spoken to him.
Right.
Mr. Winter, do you know how to turn your microphone off?
No.
So we can hear you. Can you unmute yourself? It's on the bottom tab. There's like a microphone picture. Could you press that button and we can hear you then?
And I'm getting some feedback from someone. I think they're having a conversation in the background. I can't see who that is, but it'd be great if you could keep your microphone muted. Now, Kerry, on Mr. Winter, are you okay to give him a call outside of the Teams session to see whether you can resolve that? I couldn't hear any response from him, so that would be very helpful if you can.
Yes, I'll do that. I'll phone Mr. Winter now.
Thank you very much. That's really kind. Any other points on anything to do with the structure of what we're doing on any administrative matters before I go on to a few other points? Okay. Getting more into the sort of the mechanics of the hearing, I should have all the information related to the plan before me, and anything further should only be really submitted at my request. It may, as I've said previously, be useful to have the local plan library open. We will in particular be discussing examination document CD1/1, that's the plan as it was submitted, and document NWBC20E, that is the latest schedule of potential main modifications, or MMs, which I may ultimately recommend be made to the plan in order that it represents a sound strategy and therefore is capable of being adopted. Now, what I'm looking at is soundness, and that for the purposes of this plan, given when it was submitted, is soundness. The tests are set out in paragraph 182 of the 2012 version of the National Planning Policy Framework. That's available on the National Archives online. That's the version that we're going off, although, as we've discussed in previous sessions, and I'm just doing a very brief recap of the process to date, there have been 2 updates to that document during the examination, which apply to decision taking and therefore are logically relevant to some extent, and we will therefore touch also, I suspect, on the latest version of the National Planning Policy Framework, the NPPF. I mentioned in INSP 20 back in May that there's some urgency in bringing the examination to a conclusion. I would therefore encourage everyone to make their contributions succinct. Evidently, I'm the notable exception to that. And remembering that we have discussed much already, and I have extensive information before me. So in that context, as I have said in previous sessions, it may not be necessary to consider each and all of the matters, issues and questions I have set out in INSP 5B, and others may need to be addressed only briefly. The opposite is true. We may need to recap certain issues and please, if there is something that you want to raise that is not on those documents, just put your hand up and I will come round to you. Please don't take offence if I stop you when I've heard enough on a particular point. But I would explain that part of the hearing process is for me to hear and to explore the issues rather than to arrive at a particular finding here and now. I may, of course, as I've done previously, write to the council if more is needed on a certain matter, though given the stage of the examination, I will seek to keep that to an absolute minimum. I would point out there's no difference as to whether someone's perspective is made in writing or here during the hearing. And in that breath, I note that some individuals have submitted comments in lieu of attending the hearing for whatever reason. Those are numbered, I think, ALC in the examination library, and I have taken account of them and incorporated them into the agenda for today. In terms of timings, we have 3 days scheduled with a potential reserve day on Friday, if that is needed. As they have done before, I'm just seeing who's on the line. Sorry, something popped up there. As they have done before, I would ask that the council keep a list of actions and potential main modifications, and I will of course try and do the same. So what we're working towards at the end of these hearings, the aim is to have a comprehensive schedule of MMs, main modifications, subject to the incorporation of which I will be in a position to recommend the plan is sound and may be adopted. However, that schedule will need to be subject to sustainability appraisal and again subject to consultation. Now, the examination only concludes when my report is with the council. I hope that briefly sets out where we have been and where we're going. I would point out also that the agenda that I've set out is indicative. I've made a note of various issues or follow-on questions that I want to raise. And in a minute, when we turn to paragraph 9 of INSP 5B, I'll do a brief roll call to check that I have everyone here that we were expecting. So before we turn to that paragraph 9, are there any questions from anyone at this stage, any issues that people want to raise? Okay. Right then, paragraph 9 of INSP 5B. I thought it would be useful as an introduction, just for, given the duration between now and the last hearings, to have an update from the council on various circumstances that have changed during examination, which may guide some of the discussion subsequently. So that is what we're going to turn to now. Now, I'm just going to have a look at who I expect to be here. So if I can just read out who I have on the list that has been prepared by Kerry. If you can just indicate whether you are or not here. Well, of course, if you're not here, you can't indicate that, but that would be very helpful. So from the council, I have Dorothy Barrett.
Yes, sir, I'm here.
Thank you. I also have Mike Dittman, who may not be. Okay, thank you. Susan Wilson, who's
Sue is here. She just not got her earphones in at the moment. She was just
okay,
doing
and
something.
okay,
So,
great, thank you.
But
And
she is here.
Okay, great. And is there anyone else from the council?
No,
Okay.
there isn't.
Thank you. I have Dr. Doggett.
Yes, I'm here.
Thank you. I have Mr. Austin Fell.
Present, sir.
Thank you. Mr. Best.
Yes, I'm here, thank you.
Excellent, thanks. Mr. Davies.
I'm here, sir.
Thank you. Catherine Bentham.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. David and Edward Hodgetts.
Hi, sir. It's David Hodgetts is here, but Ed is not joining us. And I can also say that Doug Han of WSP, who is down to is not here as well.
Okay. So it's just you, David. Thank you very much. Neil, Mr. Cox, Neil Cox.
Morning, sir.
Thank you. Catherine O'Toole.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Victoria Lane.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Victoria. Sean Griffiths.
Yes, good morning, sir.
Ooh, bit of feedback. Matt Evans. I think we got a message actually saying that Mr. Evans, representing Gladman, was not going to attend.
That's correct, sir. Yes.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Rose.
Paul, if you mean Paul Rouse,
I'm terribly sorry, I've got your name wrong. Yeah, I've got Paul Rouse
as well,
and Mark Rose representing Ciel.
Yes,
so Paul, well, that's solved two issues. I've got Mr. Rouse and Mr. Rose. Mr. Sitch. I think I saw
yes,
you
good morning, sir.
Good morning. Mr. Alan Sargent.
So I don't think he's joining us this morning. He was a possible, but I haven't seen him on. I don't believe he is at the moment. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. John Winter.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Winter. Can you see us now?
No, it just keeps coming up with some. Yeah, I can see you now.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
Okay. Are you happy that the connection's all right then?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you very much. And the last name I have is Mr. Wesley. Okay. Kerry, have we heard anything from Mr. Wesley?
No, I haven't, no.
Okay. Now, Mr. Winter, just to be consistent with everyone else, I mean, it's entirely your option if you want to keep your video on, but no one else has. I don't know if you you're aware that we can see you, but I'll leave that choice to you. Thank you. So that's clarified who's here. Now, may I therefore turn to the council? I think it would be useful to start with the items I have put under paragraph 9. Mrs. Barrett, could I ask you to start on 9.1, a brief introduction to what has come through the additional consultation process.
Okay, sir. There were 54 representations that were made to the additional documents. There's the range of issues ranging from the household projections to employment land. So there's a whole range of issues that have been covered by those. As you say, there's some additional comments that were received on the 4th of December. There's six papers of those, and they are on the website as well. They're numbered AEC 1 to 6. The representations, the 54 representations are numbered ALP 1 to 54. During the hearings, we'll keep a record, as you say. We'll use it off the NWBC 20E, and we'll create a new version of that as we go through the process. So hopefully we can keep a record of everything that's going on there. Would you like me to go on to item 2? Or
yes, please. Yes, yeah. Please. And if you, no, that would be useful. And if you could just, I mean, we'll come on to the A5 and infrastructure in a subsequent session, but it would just be useful to explain what those documents are. Yeah, thank you.
In terms of the A5, we've now got a statement of common ground. On the website, it's SOCG 05A5, and it's a signed document between Highways England, the Department of Transport, Midlands Connect, Warwickshire County Council and ourselves, and it sets out the timetable for the delivery of the A5, the funding mechanism and how that's going to be sorted out. And as you say, we can talk about it in detail when we get to that part in the hearings.
Okay, thank you very much. Just for my benefit, and this is skipping ahead slightly, you helpfully set out a potential stepped trajectory or 2 options, 1 and 2. May I just ask that statement of common ground in respect of the A5, the timings presumably align with the option 2 trajectory that you're advancing, is that correct?
The option 2 does allow for more housing to come forward slightly before the A5 is completed, because I would refer you to the paragraph 3.7 in the SOCG that actually refers to the fact that where that Highways England won't object to housing sites being given planning permission because they know that this money is there, the road is being improved, so there shouldn't be any objection strategically to any housing coming forward even before the road is fully open.
Okay, thank you. And I'm sure some individuals will want to talk about that when we come on to infrastructure. But no, that's helpful to outline how those documents interact and what they say. Thank you. Now, that's very helpful. I'm just checking. Sorry if I keep looking around, just to check that there are no hands up. I have under point 9.3 any implications of the High Speed 2 programme. Now I know that was raised by KNG, who have submitted one of these additional examination correspondence points, and I've taken account of that. But any comments that you'd like to make on that?
Just to say that phase 1 has now had the notice to proceed and construction's underway. So that's in its construction phase. So that's the section that would go from the Solihull Coleshill area and go up to the Manchester line. The phase 2B section has been slightly delayed. They haven't yet, there are draft safeguarding plans out there, but the safeguarded plans that are still in place are the ones that just show a set meterage, and it's just a corridor. It's not like the phase 1 safeguarded area, which is, in my terms, is higgledy-piggledy. It's all over the place. So, yes. So the phase 2B hasn't quite got to the safeguarding of the route yet in terms of the exact land take that they're going to be using.
Okay, thank you very much. And Mr. Winter, I see you have your hand up.
Yes, if I can just go back to the statement about what Dorothy made about the A5. When the plan was first drew up, it was said that the A5 was critical, and I don't think I honestly think the A5 should be done before any building takes place.
And I think that's I saw that in a number of representations in relation to the additional consultation, and we will certainly come on to that. That's a helpful placeover. Thank you, Mr. Winter.
Thank you.
Thank you. If I could just ask you, if that's the end, to lower your hand, that would be really helpful. Thanks. Just so it doesn't distract me. Thank you. So we'll come on again to this morning to the implications of household projections published in 2018. Would the council at this stage like to say anything about the various changes or suggested changes to planning policy or to household projections, or should we leave that to come on to in detail subsequently?
If I could just draw people's attention to two documents, and that would be AD 7B, which is a statement of common ground from the Greater Birmingham HMA, and also the SWAPO letter, AD 57, just so that people are aware of those before that session takes place.
Thank you. And just the Greater Birmingham letter, that reference again?
It's AD 7B.
AD 7B. Thank you. Mr. Winter, I can see your hands up. Is that a...
I'm trying to lower it.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, if you see a palm icon and press that,
yeah, it now.
It may. Hey, there we go. To save me.
Sorry about that.
No. It's to save me coming and asking you questions about something you didn't want to talk on. So, thank you. Okay. Now, in respect of town centre policy, I think in particular, we will come on to this. I just flagged up under paragraph 9 of INSP 5B that there have been amendments to the Town and Country Planning use classes order, which defines which sort of basket of uses various things fall into. Are there any comments the council would like to make at this stage on those, or?
We've had a look at that, and yes, there are the implications. So it was just to flag up that the initial implications will be on LP12, LP21 and LP33 probably at the moment. We're just, we'll be going through the document in detail just to make sure that we've covered any other ones that are affected by the change in the use classes order.
Sure. Well, thank you very much. Yeah, and those are similarly the ones I had identified where we need to have a word. Okay. I have in the additional local local plan consultation, the ALP documents. I've got reference to 2 development consent orders. I have reference to the M42 Junction 6 or 5A development consent order, and also reference, which I've noted on my notes, I'm not sure I put it in INSP 5B, to a development consent order for a rail freight interchange. It's towards the northeast, I think, of Birmingham. Again, that was just to raise it. If the council wants to set out what they see as any implications of those at this stage, yeah, I'll hear that.
In terms of the M42, it's under construction. I don't see that there's any implications for this local plan. In terms of the development off Junction 12 of the M6, I think that is just something that to be aware that other sites are coming forward, but I'm sure in terms of the employment sites, they'll be discussed at some time.
Okay, thank you. The other 2 points I had is that as I understand it, there've been a couple of additional documents that maybe, or one that certainly has been undertaken that is of direct relevance, which is the latest traveller accommodation assessment for gypsies, travellers and travelling show people, as I understand. That's document AD 56. I also saw reference to the, and we're under paragraph 9, VII, West Midlands Strategic Employment Site Study, a second edition or a second version of that. I saw reference to that, those documents. Any points from the council at this stage? I mean, obviously they're relevant to our discussion subsequently, but and indeed if there are any documents that I haven't listed there that will be particularly relevant to the discussion, it'd be useful to know about them.
In terms of the GTAA, so we'll speak to that when we get to that, but it was just to let you know that the council has updated its local development scheme, and just so that you're aware that a Gypsy and Traveller DPD is part of that work programme within the local development scheme. It's been to our LDF meeting, the local development scheme, and I was supposed to have checked, but I don't think it's gone to full council yet, so that's the reason why we haven't circulated it, but we can circulate that if need be. In terms of the West Midlands employment study, the second, the 2020 update has not yet been published, and as far as I'm aware, they're still asking for further changes to that report. So it isn't yet a published document.
Okay, thank you. I'm just looking to see if there are any hands up, if anyone else wants to comment at that stage. I mean, that's useful in terms of the Gypsy and Traveller accommodation assessment in particular. I know that is relevant. We've dealt with issues related to traveller needs previously, and I see that in main modification 32 in NWBC 20E, the latest version, that will need, it's just to flag up that will need a bit of a tweak, given that refers to that Gypsy and Traveller accommodation as being underway, but I see there is a reference to the findings of that review will inform site allocations plan specifically related to travellers. So thank you for clarifying that. I think we'll just need to return to that as we do in the process. So thank you. I can't see any hands up. That's very helpful.
Excuse me, sir.
Yes, Mr. Sitch. Yeah.
Thank you, sir. Good morning. I don't know. My hand was up. Is it not showing on your screen?
it showed up a fraction of a second ago, so there's a little bit of a lag.
Okay.
So I will take that on board and make sure I'm I'm a little bit slower. Yeah,
that's okay. No, good morning, sir. It's Mark Sitch from Barton Wilmore. For today's session here on behalf of the Church Commissioners of England in respect of the land at Polesworth and Dordon. We, just to supplement what Ms Barrett said in respect of the West Midlands Strategic Employment Site Study, and in respect of our client's interest at Stowford, and appreciate we'll go into detail on tomorrow's sessions. We wrote to the lead authority, which is Staffordshire County Council, in respect to the study, requesting its publication in its final form at the beginning of December, the 1st of December. And very much in mind, sir, that you were looking at this issue of need, and we had a discussion at the first hearings as to the extent of need, but also the area in which we felt that need was greatest, of which North Warwickshire clearly sits within. And we wrote, say, to the Staffordshire County Council, happily, if you'll like to have a copy of that letter, mentioning that it was actually impacting on the production of local plans, and that actually it would be useful for you to have that study for the purposes of this these further hearing sessions, and also other plans that are being produced in the area. The response we had back was that there are still changes to be made, whilst a number of the client group, and that's the clients being the local authorities, are happy with the report. There are still some changes to be made, and the expectation now is that it won't be before the end of this year. It's likely to be early next. We would like to think January. That's certainly the feedback we've got of 2021, but at the moment you don't have that study. All the points that were made by ourselves and others on respect of their clients at the first hearings still remain the case, and if anything, actually the needs got greater since those first hearings, sir. So if you're content for me to share that letter with you and the update for your purposes ahead of the session tomorrow, we can do that and share that with Kerry.
Okay. Yes, I mean, terribly sorry, Mr. Sitch. Are you able to mute your microphone? Thank you. Yes, I was hearing myself replayed horribly a second later. I think in what you've said, you've actually explained that your previous comment stands. That document is a work in progress, albeit it sounds like relatively far down the track, no pun intended. So I don't think there's any particular need for me to see that engagement with you and Staffordshire, unless, of course, the council is of a different view, and I'll turn to Mrs. Barrett on that point.
No, sir, I don't think so. It just confirms that there are some further changes that need to be made, and the report still hasn't been published. So we're still as we were, I'm afraid.
And Mr. Sitch, if that position is right with you, I mean, we can talk through in substance any of the points in a subsequent session.
Yes, sir. And I think it would be helpful to discuss that in the subsequent sessions. Yes, please.
Thank you.
I think the principal point being there are a number of the client group that are content with the report, and obviously there's one or two that are holding it back and its publication, which is, we say, impacting on the production of plans, including this one.
Okay.
Yeah,
Thank
I'll
you.
discuss that further tomorrow, sir.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. And the last, so I'm just going a bit slower, seeing if anyone else's hand pops up.
Yes, sir, there is another hand. It's Paul Rouse.
Now, interestingly, I can't see that one, so that's very helpful that you flagged that up. Mr. Rouse.
Sir, thank you. I hear you clearly, so I don't wish to dwell unnecessarily on the matter, but as Mr. Sitch raises it, But we are in an unfortunate position of being in the same situation we were in the last local plan review with the evidence in relation to strategic employment sites, which was to remind ourselves that the first version of that strategic study was due to be published. The inspector specifically deferred in his report to the publication of that study, requiring the plan to respond to that when it came out. We are in that situation now with this plan. There is a question mark over the age of that study because it dates from 2015, which you've raised, and age of other evidence has been raised. It's appropriate that the study is updated, and that's what the NPPF calls for. That study has been updated. The council is aware of the evidence as part of the commissioning body, and it chooses to not produce that evidence. It seems unfortunate to me that that should be allowed to be the case when it is clearly material to the proceedings at hand. So I just, ask that we do give that document proper consideration as we go forward, please.
And I think, setting aside any sort of discussions internally about what that document will say, I think what we can do, certainly in substance, is talk about what the situation is when we come on to employment land. I would be kind of reticent to say that that document should be published, as I don't know what it says or what the discussions have been. But certainly, insofar as any issues that are emerging are relevant, let's talk about them in employment land.
Thanks, sir.
Thank you. Okay, thank you. Now, I can now see that Mr. Rouse's hand is it was there. So there's obviously a bit of a delay. So bear with me as I may have some long and awkward pauses in the discussion just to make sure that I have seen everyone. There's obviously some sort of lag there. The last point that I put under section 9 of INSP 5B was if the council at this stage, or if anyone at this stage wanted to raise any matters in terms of relevant appeals, case law, or developments in neighbourhood and neighbouring plan making during this time. I have cited one case that is of some relevance to household projections, the Keep Bourne End Green case. I have a few references to things that have come through in the additional local plan consultation. But if there is anything that's particularly relevant at this stage, I would welcome anyone raising it, just so we can have it in front of us as we go forward. Any points that anyone wants to raise? Okay, thank you. Mr. Winter, I'm only raising this as I'm not sure you're aware that we can see you. If you were minded to turn your video off, you can press it looks like a rectangle with a triangle pointing at it, the video icon. If you press that, it becomes crossed out, and that will mean we don't see you. But I just want to be sure that you're aware. There we are. Now we can't. Right. Well then, and Mr. Winter, you've put your hand.
Yes.
Your hand. Yes. Sorry, Mr. Winter.
Yes, just listening to what's previously been said about the employment sites, it looks as though the planning that they want to build the houses for these employment sites to be built in North Warwickshire. And a load of rubbish there is that they should have the land. If they're doing the employment site, they should have development land for housing as well.
Okay, thank you, and we'll certainly come on to the interaction between employment and housing. I mean, we still start on the agenda with housing, but we will come on to employment. Thank you, Mr. Rouse. Your hand is up as well. That may just be a legacy hand, as it were.
It's not on my screen, sir.
Okay. There's obviously some. There's obviously some lag. What I might do at the break is log out and come back in and see if that refreshes things. I can now see it as down. So maybe it's a minute delay or something. Anyway, let's move on then. Unless there is anyone else who wants to speak at this stage to INSP 5B question or paragraph 10. So the question, as I've put again, is similarly an update in terms of what is the current situation in the borough in terms of housing completions, unimplemented permissions and forecast supply from allocations and all other sources. Now, I have noted some documents that I have in that respect, but it is broadly bringing us up to date with the current housing supply and forecast situation in the borough. So could I turn to Mrs. Barrett on that point?
Yes, sir. Because of the situation that we have this year, the monitoring is as of March 2019. We haven't yet been able to complete the monitoring for March 2020. So everything that we say is as of that time, which actually ties in with the NWBC 24B Annex H, which is the 5-year housing land supply paper. So it does all tie together. So at that stage, we had a 6.39 years of supply. That hasn't changed. We've got the option 2 of the trajectory in NWBC 26. I think there's, since the discussions have been going on with the hearings, there are probably some minor changes in terms of H3, which is the football ground. Of course, in the modifications, we're now suggesting it's a reserve housing site, so that would have to just be reflected in there. And also, this year we got the updated trajectory from H7, so that figure there would have to be amended as well, because that would take that down within the plan period to 1965, I believe it is. Sorry,
okay.
So there are some minor changes in there, but it's March 19 that is the date that we have all of the information for.
And if I can just clarify one point, thank you, as I just need to be very careful on dates. The figures in the various documents in terms of housing completions, they run effectively in financial years, is that right? So they run, April 2011 to say March 2012. That is the reporting period as opposed to calendar years. So that's why there's a, it's 2011 to 2012, not start date of 2011.
Sorry, I muted when I was supposed to unmute. Yes, so the monitoring year always goes from the 1st of April to the 31st of March of each of the years. So the plan itself goes up to the 2033. So that would be March 2033.
Okay, thank you. Yes, that there are. That's helpful. I think there is, and we'll come on to it as we go, but there was one document that includes 2033-34. So I just have to be quite careful about exactly drawing the time frame for the plan.
I think, if I can interject, sir, that's because the trajectory that was produced more recently in NWBC 26 reflects the fact that we expected some of the delivery from H7 to come after 2033. So instead of us just saying it was 1965 and there was another element that was coming after, I think it's 1700, sorry, in the planned period, and the other 294 was coming in the post-plan period. We put the 2 columns in just to show what we expected from those 2 additional years.
Sure, and I think that's just that's really a sort of a mathematical point, isn't it? Just to make sure that, and just so that people are aware that what we're looking at is the period between the monitoring years, not the calendar years, of 2011 to 2012 and 2022 to 2033, not 2033 to 2034.
Yes, sir.
Gotcha. Thank you. And the latest information, as you mentioned, NWBC 24 Annex H, is that data is correct as of March 2019. Now, inevitably, the examination has rumbled on, so that's that's a line. We have the data from there. Subsequent. You mentioned there may be some flex, but that's broadly the picture as it stands. Okay.
Yes, sir. There will be some minor tweaks between them because, as you say, the time's gone on. But that was a position spec at that time.
Thank you. Now I'm just going to go slightly slowly to see if there are any comments. Because as I have it looking through those documents, and I just want to be really clear on this as a starting point, as of March 2019, net completions since 2011-2012 stood at 1,570, as I have it. At that stage, the permission was in place for 1,279 homes in various locations. Now, if that leaves a figure of just under 6,749 to meet what we are looking at currently in terms of the local plans requirement of 9598. I will. I can't actually share my screen. I had that as the data to bring up just to double check. I mean, I've spoken it through, but I just wanted to clarify that was the situation. So
excuse me, sir. I've just changed you so that you are now a presenter. So hopefully that means that you should be able to share your screen.
Thank you very much. That was lightning quick. So here we go. 2 seconds. If I share this very briefly. So I hope everyone can see that. So as I have it, we have the composition of what the plan is seeking to do. We have what NWBC 24 Annex H, I believe, says in terms of what has been delivered, and these are consistent with the figures I just read out, what has been permitted, how windfall is being taken account of, and in terms of allocations. I just want to check that those figures are correct by the council as you mentioned, as of March 2019.
Yes, sir. In terms of March 2019, and this is where we probably get into the mechanics of the time lag as well, because MM71 on page 50 of NWBC 20E actually has the same figure for net housing completions of 1570, but the sites with planning permission at the 1st of April 2019 is 1301.
Okay.
So there isn't much difference, but there is just a tweak of the numbers there.
Okay, thank you. Just let me make a note of that. Sorry, if ever I go quiet, that's simply to make a note of it. Okay, thank you. I can't see any hands. I'm slightly concerned that maybe I can't.
Hello, sir. It's just Mr. Ostenfeld here.
Mr. Ostenfeld.
Thank you, sir. Yeah, just a small point, and one perhaps worth raising. I note that the examination has rolled on, as you will no doubt be aware, for a number of months now, and the council are taking great pains to update a number of components of the evidence base, particularly relating to housing delivery. My query here to the council is whether or not we should be starting the plan with the most up-to-date evidence. Now, assuming that the plan will be adopted in 2021, it would clearly make sense to use the most up-to-date information available at the time. Now, whilst the council suggests that they don't have last year's monitoring data, we do have on the government's published website, this is live table 122, data of completions for the 2019-20 monitoring year. And this suggests that North Warwickshire has completed 215 dwellings. Now, what we don't have, sir, and this is the liberty of the council to provide, is the comparative figure for permissions as well. But it seems to me if we're taking these steps to make sure that we start off bang up to date, it would be in the council's best interest to make sure that the position is as close to up to date as we can get it.
Thank you. I think that's a point very clearly made. You've made reference to publicly available data on the government's website in terms of net additions between 2019 and 2020. Inevitably, as things move, you've got to draw a line somewhere. I take your point in terms of up-to-date evidence, and that indeed is one of the things that is said in paragraph 182, or is it 153, appropriate and up-to-date evidence. So let me bundle up those points and put it to the council. Thank you, Mr. Ostenfeld.
In terms of the complete picture for the monitoring 2019-20, sir, we just don't have that. We weren't able to do all the site visits and things like that, so there has been a delay. I wasn't aware, I must admit, I'll put my hand up, I wasn't aware that we'd actually published the figure of the 215. So that is news to me as well, so that must have been done very recently. But if we do update the figures to the 2019 date with the 2020 date, then that would have implications on not just the total completions for the year, it would also have implications for the outstanding permissions, it would also have implications on the trajectory. So it has the consequences of changing an awful lot of information that you have before you. It is possible that we can do that, but the consequences of it are that, and to be quite frank, we want the local plan to be adopted ASAP, and so we're in your hands for that one. So,
and I think I've kind of heard both sides of that, and the thing for me in terms of my involvement in the process is to focus on soundness. So there may be issues of data that don't go to soundness, but which may nevertheless be beneficial in terms of updating figures. But I need to take those 2 points, those two perspectives, and consider how they relate to the sort of fundamental soundness of the plan. So I think I've heard both perspectives. One question I would ask, indeed of the council and of Mr. Ostenfeld, is whether those MHCLG, the government figures, which, as I understand it, are drawn from PS1 and PS2 development control return forms, whether they're comparing like for like. You mentioned a date of 2019 to 2020. That may be a calendar year as opposed to a monitoring year, which is the basis the council approach it. I'm just wondering if either of you know whether that is a like-for-like comparison.
Sir, if I can sort of come in on this point.
Yeah.
it's an aggregate of information that the council will provide on a quarterly basis to MHCLG. Invariably, we find that the data doesn't always tally with what is published in council records for reasons as you've expressed, that it's a function of development, building control rather than the planning services. But it does indicate that the work in essence has been done. The council have quantified a reasonable figure. The other point I'd make, sir, perhaps, is that this is a necessary function of the planning unit to undertake an annual review of their 5-year housing land supply, which inevitably would mean rebasing the figure on an annual basis anyway. So if we are, as I said before, looking to adopt in 2021, if we're including information which is then 15 months old, it just seems a little perverse in the interest of showing a complete picture. So for the purposes of what we're talking about today, sir, I'd consider that it provides an appropriate starting point for considering what last year's figures were. The difficulty that arises, sir, is whether or not that comparative analysis of permissions is there as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Mrs. Barrett.
If it's based on the builder control completions, I have real concerns about that, because we've tried to use them in the past and we failed miserably because they have a massive time lag between their completions and what we consider to be a completed house. So there are issues there anyway. But to be honest, sir, in a normal year, by September, we would have issued and published our monitoring information. Unfortunately, with the year that we've had, we've really struggled with the site visits and doing all the monitoring that we really needed to have done. So it is a situation that we are currently in. I can't change what's happened in the last 9 months, so it is one of those, but we're in your hands. If you feel that it would be better, then we will work to try and make sure that we can achieve that.
Thank you. Well, yeah, I've heard both sides, and thank you for making those points very clearly. Okay. Can I ask one question? So the pie chart I showed previously had within the plan period, so we're talking about, and we dealt with this in a previous session, we're talking about the distinction between net supply from allocations and gross supply, which is the total supply that they may produce, if fully built out over time. The figure that I cited there, we had 6,260 anticipated to arise homes, anticipated to be delivered from site allocations over the planned period. Can I just check, is that that's not double counting any permissions and allocations? Those are separate things, although there are some elements of allocations which have permission, as I think you've set out in NWBC 24. Is that right? There's no sort of double counting there.
So we've tried to make sure that there isn't any double counting, that if a site is in with the planning permissions, it isn't then in the allocations and vice versa. However, I think at one of the hearing sessions, you requested that where a site does have planning permission, that should be perhaps reflected in the sites that are to be allocated. And I think that's where we're now in this stage, that if we do the monitoring as of March 2019, then there are certain sites on MM72 that perhaps need to come back in, because although they have got planning permission, they didn't have that at March 19.
So that is correct as of March 2019, but taking account of Mr. Austenfeld's comments, that situation may have changed since.
Yes.
Okay,
yes.
and
so,
if I can just pause you on that point. If I you've got NWBC 24 for Appendix F, which is the housing trajectory. Now that document, as I see it, is the latest document where you set out site by site what all those components of that pie chart are, and what their stage in the planning process is, and etc. That is the document that I referred to earlier that has a 2033, 2034 column, which you've helpfully explained relates specifically to H7. But in terms of at 31st of March 2019, in line with the latest monitoring data in terms of completions, permissions and allocations, is that document, so Appendix F of NWBC 24, is that correct at that date?
At that stage, sir, we still expected the 2000 to be delivered on that site within the plan period. From my recollection of how everything has been done, and it's only more recently that it's become apparent that a small element of that will be post the plan period. So NWBC 24 took account of the fact that not all of the elements would be coming forward within the plan period, but whether that was absolutely the right situation as of March 2019, I'm just looking at my colleague Mike and just seeing whether he's just about to see if he can help me on that one.
Yes,
okay.
Yeah. Is it okay for me to come in now?
Yeah, of course.
Slight delay, obviously, between NWBC 24 Annex F that you've referred to. If you go to, and let me just get the list up, to NWBC 24B Annex H, where we have the response and reference to the 5-year housing supply report. That's the, let me just bring that one up. I might be wrong there, sorry, excuse me. Let me just go back. It is, sorry, NWBC 26C, Summary of Trajectory. This is post NWBC 24F, and this is where we got some additional information, obviously from H7, and we applied this information because, of course, it is fairly relevant to the option 2 that we looked at. If you look at the summary and full table on that document, there you have a large spreadsheet which lists individually all the planning applications, and this also reflected some changes to the 5-year housing land supply that had come in prior to March 2019 as a result of an appeal. So there's some minor changes, not significant, but you've still got the 1301 figure, which is basically there's a lapse rate applied to the original consent. At the bottom of that summary table, you will see the allocations, and they are the allocations at that time, as I said, prior to March 31st, 2019, that applied. So we've specified the allocations and the trajectory delivery. We've indicated, obviously, with H7 that 294 are coming outside of the plan period, 2033, 34, 34, 35. They are in line at 224 in the Excel spreadsheet, if you wish to look at. And basically what I'm saying is, quite clearly, if you go through line by line that spreadsheet, you can see we have separated the allocations from the planning applications. Obviously, where applications have been approved or are approved or are coming forward, we made a note of them in one of the columns, column B, and in the notes in AD. However, we've made sure quite categorically there is no double counting. You have the allocations, irrespective of whether they now have consent, at that March 2019 period, and the single applications above them, again, with some amendments as a result of appeals that are relevant, and they don't. There's no crossover. There's no double counting.
Thank you. No, that's very helpful. And just to clarify, the NWBC 26C, which does set everything out, that work chart, the summary and full table, which is an update to NWBC 24 Appendix H, I think. That is correct. Also, as of March 2019, that's the date.
That is correct, sir. Yes. Okay. The only element to some extent you would say is post was that information in respect of H7, but as that was such a significant change, I don't think there was any way we could make the assumption if we are looking at a more accurate trajectory.
Okay. Thank you. That's very helpful clarification. Now, I have been, I can't see hands up. So what I'm going to do at the break is log out and log back in and see if it's the change to sort of my permissions, which has made that lag creep in. I see, though, I've been told that Mr. Cox has his hands up. Mr. Cox.
Yeah, thank you, sir. I'm just trying to seek a bit more clarification because I am now a little confused. I know it's been raised by others. I'm just not quite clear what figure we're working to in terms of the yield from allocations. So that table in NWBC 26C comes to a total of 6,280. Within the main modification 72 identifies a revised list of proposed allocations. That figure equates to 6,260, not 6,280. MM71 identifies the yield from allocations of 6,067. And MMX, the unnumbered main modification on page 55, states allocation yield of 6,574 with a 5% buffer.
Thank you. I think those are, yeah, I mean, I remember some of those figures in the discussion as to whether some are included in allocations, whether some are included in planning permissions, the changeable timescale. But I think that's a point to put to the council. As I hear it, though, the 5-year housing land supply data and NWBC 26C is the position that is correct as of March 2019, incorporating the monitoring year, April 2018 to March 2019, and that is what the council are putting forward, and I've heard views as to whether I should consider what has happened subsequently in terms of effectively rebasing that data. But Mr. Dittman, may I get your view on that?
Yes, thank you, sir. Let me just lower my hand first. Yes, sir. Yes, we, as Mr. Cox has stated, we did notice some minor anomalies. The 6260, I think, in NWBC 20E is incorrect and it needs revising. I think we have informed you that there will be some minor changes to that to reflect better the NWBC 26C documents. We've also looked at, because of the 2018-19 period and issues that have been raised regarding 2 of the allocations that had planning consent pending section 106s, but we brought them back into the allocations, and there will be some minor changes, and that is partly the reason why you are seeing some differences between the tables. An example would be H1, where particularly the 499 and 531 figures have been used in different tables. Unfortunately, this reflects an expectation. We were hoping that a rapid signing of 106 would be taken. That hasn't subsequently happened. So we've reflected some of the concerns that were raised by these submissions and effectively replaced the planning consent approach that we were taking and put it back into an allocation. And that's caused some differences between the tables. I do apologise, and I obviously note Mr Cox's confusion, because it did cause us some issues. But we are looking at effectively the NWBC 26C primarily. Those are where the main figures are coming from, and there may be some minor changes subsequent to the difference between whether we treat it as an allocation or whether it's reflected in the planning permissions.
Okay, thank you. And while that's helpful clarification, I think Mr Cox, unless you want to come back specifically on that, I understand the point, and I will need to reflect on that. But I've heard those views. What I would like to move on to is question 11 on INSP 5B, which we've already worked our way partly towards. So the overall housing requirement that all those various components are working towards, am I correct in saying that is subject to I forget which number, but subject to an a minimum of 9598. I just want to double check that, 9598.
Yes, sir, that's correct.
Thank you. And I know there was additional sustainability appraisal work that you undertook on my request that considered some different figures. I know we'll come on to that in I think it's the afternoon session on Thursday. I have taken account of a point that was raised there. Now the principal question, so that's clear in terms of the components of the plan, the trajectory as set out of delivery, and then we're not talking about a step trajectory at this stage in NWBC 26. The question has been raised to the additional local plan consultation whether plan paragraph 7.35 should be amended to reflect that the housing requirement is the basis for establishing a 5-year land supply of deliverable sites. Any points from the council on that?
I think so. It depends whether it's a step trajectory, because when you do your 5-year housing land supply, it's those annual amounts that we have to achieve that should be used in your 5-year housing land supply figures. It's not the overall amount that you then divide by each of the years of the plan period. So just need to be careful which bits we're doing there. Is it for the 5-year land supply to show that if a step trajectory is acceptable, then that needs to be where we use the 5-year housing land supply against. But it is, the total amount is the 9598 though. So that's what we're trying to achieve over the plan period, but not necessarily over the 5 years.
Okay, now that sounds very logical. Any hands? Anyone want to comment on that? Okay, I'm just looking at the multiple ways through which I might be notified that anyone's hand is up, but I can see that. Okay. Now, question 12 on INSP 5B. In terms of we'll come on to the delivery. Sorry, I've phrased this question slightly awkwardly. We'll come on to anticipated delivery of site allocations. But in terms of what has been delivered and what has permission. Are there any disputes in terms of those figures? I know there is an issue that we'll come on to again about what the lapse rate is, how that's being calculated, but in terms of existing completions and in terms of those with planning permission, are there any disputes that anyone is aware of with those figures as Mr. Dittman recently presented them?
There's no raised hands that I can see, sir.
I mean, clearly, I would thank you. I would say that I've taken account of all the various representations and the evidence before me. In looking through that, I remember a discussion previously about extra care homes at Manchester on this very point. So unless, and I can't see any hands, unless there is anyone, we will move on to question 13. What are the implications of household projections based on 2018 data for the borough and the housing market areas, plural, of which it is part? Now, the key question I need to think about is within the terms of the planning practice guidance as it applied back to this plan as opposed to as it stands now. Do those household projections represent a meaningful change within the terms of the planning practice guidance? Now, I've put some information in INSP 5B as to what I see as the implications of those household projections in terms of the changes to previous data series that they potentially signify for North Warwickshire. Sorry, I lost my train of thought slightly there. But I wanted to raise this as an issue so I can first get the council's view on it. And I know I was just searching for the document, I believe it was NWBC 26, in which the council looked at what the changes resulting from the 2018 data as opposed to earlier data series would mean for the borough and for the wider housing market contexts. Any initial points from the council on that? Specifically, the question is, do household projections 2018 represent a meaningful change?
Hi, sir. It's Mr. Dittman again. There are a number of issues with the HHP 2018, as you're aware. ONS themselves have advised caution over the use of the figures. It's a bit like, as I think was referred to in the GBHMA representation, a bit like apples and pears. We do not believe there is a significant difference, although there is a significant statistical change shown, which I think is around about the 156% in terms of the LHN figure. The difficulty we are in with the 2018 is that to use that figure, you would have to apply that across the West Midlands because of the circumstances we are in, where we have accommodated the 3650, 10% of the Birmingham shortfall. That gives us the 958 total. The difference between that and the HHP is about, I think, 140, which we didn't see as significant. The difficulty we're in is what then do you do with that 10% shortfall? We believe, as a result of the fact that time has moved over, the HHP effectively has been accommodating that, and that's why there's no significance. But there is concerns that if we take the HHP 2018 as it stands, we will still then get a response, whether that be from the Birmingham HMA or from others, what to do with that 3650. Now, we believe that 3650 is part of that. and it is not, in comparison to the two figures we're dealing with, not significant. Although we do accept, in statistical terms, there is a strategic difference between the two.
I see. That's a very helpful explanation. So as I have it, yes, numerically or statistically, a difference, but in terms of substance, not a significant change. I noticed I didn't use quite the phrase "not a meaningful change," but I understand your perspective. Now, does anyone else want to comment on that?
I've raised my hand, sir, so
I can see that.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah. It was just in relation to that. I would draw your attention to AD 7B and AD 57.
Sorry, these are the CSWAPO and the Birmingham Statement of Common Ground.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, I have heard that Kerry is doing a fantastic job of texting me simultaneously that there are no other hands up. So thank you for that. As I say, I would, when we come to the break, and we are now on question 13, I aim to get to question 17, so we may go for maybe 15 minutes longer. When we get to the break, I would encourage all you to stay in and just as you all are currently, make sure that you're muted and your video is off. I'm actually going to leave and then rejoin, and hopefully that will resolve the issue in terms of hands up. So question 14, as I had it, I have set out, I'm hoping for a one-word answer in terms of the household projections and local housing need. With reference to question 14, it seems that the local housing need, based on the approach to calculating that under the present National Planning Policy Framework and the guidance, is 171 households a year.
Yes, sir.
Good. Wow, that's very helpful. I'm just again scanning for hands. So now we come to the crux of the matter under question 15. Thank you again, Kerry. With reference to the planning practice guidance and to the judgment in this one came out quite recently, keep a born end. And I have noted, as Mrs. Barrett pointed out, AD7B and AD57 in that context. Which household projections or series or data are the council proposing that I use as the starting point for establishing housing needs? Is it 2012, 2014, 2016 or 2018? That question to the council, please.
Yes, so the 2014, because the 2012 were updated to the 2014 figures in the 2015 SHMA, the Strategic Housing Market Assessment, and also I would refer you to NWBC 16, which was a paper produced by Nick Island in ICENI, where he talked about the difference between the 14 and the 16 household projections, and said that there wasn't much difference between those, although the PPG actually does say you should use the 2014 household projections because there are issues with the 2016 household projections. So I'd still go with the 2014.
2014, thank you very much. Any, that's very clear, and yeah, good to note that. That paper, and of course I would just explain while anyone's thinking about whether they want to put their hands up and raise anything, that when we're talking about the data series, the 2014 household projections, they don't necessarily get released in 2014, so there are a number of different dates flying around. For example, we've just had the 2018 household projections published in 2020, so there's a lag time there. But what I've just heard is consistent with the approach in the 2015 SHMA update and the approach in the planning practice guidance as it stood. The council is going with household projections based on 2014 data, and it is their position that the 2018 household projections do not mark a significant difference from that point for various contextual reasons. Any hands, any comments? Thank you again, Kerry. I can see that there are no hands. Well, I can't see. I've heard that there are no hands. Question 16 then. This was a question of clarification from the council in terms of lapse rates. And when I'm talking about lapse rates, I know there are various different terms that can be used for that, but it's the number of permissions that you have, it's the permissions that you have for a certain number of homes and how many of those fall out of the system for whatever reason, whether that's non-implementation, viability issues and the like. So that's the lapse rate, how many permissions you have versus what you get out at the end. We've had some correspondence on this. I've flagged up NWBC 24 Annex H. I've also flagged up INSP 19 in terms of the data on lapse rates. And this question would really be for the council to explain what approach has been taken in terms of lapse rates to development that benefits from permission at the moment and to allocations, and whether that is justified in that context. So could I ask the council to explain that position, then I'll invite anyone who wants to speak on that.
In terms of the lapse rate, so we've agreed that it would be the 3% figure that would be used, and I believe that that should be 3% on the outstanding planning permissions, not on the allocations. That's my opinion, is that it shouldn't be on the allocations, because the allocations are sites that we expect to come forward, have been promoted to come forward, so we don't expect them to then fall by the wayside. It's the permissions that are the ones that the 3% should be applied against. And that is probably where a further update possibly of table 7 needs to occur, just to show where the 3% is actually taken off in terms of the figures. So there may need to be an update of that table.
I think that would be very helpful in terms of just setting that out clearly. What I've heard is a 3% lapse rate has indeed been applied, as opposed to 1.14, which we were talking about in previous sessions, to sites which have permission at the moment. That is the Sun 1301 that we were talking about earlier. No, as I understand it, no lapse rate has been applied to allocations, although I would note that we have previously talked about delivery from those sites and the density of those sites in terms of local plan targets. So there are some other factors at play there, and we will come on to those, I'm sure, when we come to allocations. But that has helped clarify my understanding in the light of previous correspondence at examination. Mr. Dittman.
Thank you, sir. Just for clarification again, the NWBC 26C summary table we referred to earlier does incorporate that 3% lapse rate. If you look at the summary table on the Excel spreadsheet, it has a 1341 planning allocations to which we have applied the 3% lapse rate, and hence in the trajectory and in the figures themselves, we only actually show the 1301 that you've just referred to, sir.
Thank you. That's very helpful. And sorry, I was listening. I was just writing down where those points that we've raised probably need a clarification through main modifications. And as I have it so far, we've only talked about two potential changes, although we will need to, at some point at the end of these hearings, go through all the main modifications. But we have looked at a potential alteration to paragraph 7.35 of the plan as submitted to make sure that the stepped housing trajectory is the basis for for calculating a 5-year housing land supply, in line with NPPF paragraph 49, if I remember correctly, of the 2012 version, and also an amendment reflecting the lapse rate position, which I will, if anyone wants to speak to that, I will hear that, but in table 7 of the plan, which is currently subject to a main modification as well. Those are the two I have at this stage. Does anyone want to speak to that point, or else we will move on to windfall, which we may have already dealt with. I'm getting a message through that there are, this is like a control center, that there are no other hands up. Okay. So we talked previously in previous sessions extensively about windfall, what that means in terms of this plan, whether there is sort of historic evidence of what has come forward from windfall, and that is articulated in a plan policy regarding provision anticipated supply of 60 dwellings a year from windfall provision. Now, I've heard arguments about whether that is justified based on the evidence so far, but in terms of what I want to deal with here, as I see it, windfall provision, I keep on calling it windfall provision, windfall supply is counted for only in the last 2 years of the 5-year land supply calculation, as far as the council have it. So that is from years 2022 to 2023 onwards, which makes a total, assuming the end year of the plan is 2022, 2023, discounting anything from H17, of 660 dwellings anticipated to come forward by windfall provision. That's very helpful. I have put there under question 17. Sorry, for those of you that perhaps weren't looking at the screen, we're getting some nods there. With reference to paragraph 48 of the NPPF 2012 and elements of the planning practice guidance as they're applied, there's the reference to the need for compelling evidence in respect of windfall inclusion in a 5-year housing land supply. Any comments from the council? I have the evidence in terms of what has occurred in terms of windfall. I've just set out that windfall provision is being inputted into housing figures in the local plan only for the last 2 years of the 5-year land supply. Any comments the council would like to make on that, and then I'll open up if anyone else wants to discuss it.
The only comment I'd like to make is just to refer you back to NWBC 18, which talks about the windfall. That goes up to 2018 figures. So.
When you say 2018, the monitoring year of 2017 to 2018, is that?
Yes, yes sir. Yes.
Yeah. Mr. Dittman, I see you've got your hand up. That may be a legacy hand from the previous discussion.
Yes, sir, it is a legacy hand. Unfortunately, it's not showing on ours, so I think it's just a glitch at your end, sir.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. I can't see any hands up. I've had a message that there are no other hands up. I am slightly concerned that I'm not getting these messages. So what I will do, we'll pause here. I'll adjourn the hearing. We'll come back at, what should we go for? 11:35. I'll just give myself. If we come back, so if we adjourn now, we come back at 11:35. That would be brilliant. And then what we're going to look at is based on the session earlier. We're going to look at the stepped trajectory. So that will be restarting from document INSP 5B, paragraph 18. We're going to look at that and go through the remaining questions I have put on housing before we break, hopefully about 1 or 1:30, and then come back to talk about infrastructure and viability. Are there any questions? I'll just throw it open. Are there any questions at this stage or any points that I have not enabled you to raise in respect of what we've discussed so far? Okay, well then I will adjourn and we'll come back at 11:35. As you are all doing, mute and video off, and Okay, I'm just going to give it 1 more minute till it ticks over until 11:35 so that people are back at their seats. Okay, according to my system, that's 11:35. Let's reconvene the hearing. We are now on examination document INSP 5B, paragraph 18. We're going to look, following our discussion earlier, of how components of housing supply and a housing requirement. We're going to look at a housing trajectory, a stepped housing trajectory, and 5-year housing land supply. Now, I thought it prudent, and I've set out in INSP 5B to explain the correspondence and the history, if you like, to this issue in the examination so far. There are a few points of clarification, so bear with me. Previously, I had indicatively indicated that a stepped trajectory may be appropriate. The Planning Practice Guidance, or PPG, as I've used the acronym in that document, sets out that that may be appropriate where there's a significant change in the level of housing brought forward relative to an existing plan. Now, there are various ways in which there are various components of how a 5-year housing land supply is calculated. I've put there that the Planning Practice Guidance indicates that a case for the Liverpool approach, which is looking at any shortfall over the plan period, which in this case is 2011 to 2033, any shortfall to date should be addressed in calculating a 5-year housing land supply. We clarified earlier, and with reference to paragraph 7.35 of the local plan and a potential main modification to it, that we're looking at a step trajectory as the basis for calculating a 5-year housing land supply. And I understand from what the council has previously said that that is the basis of their latest 5-year housing land supply monitoring data, correct as of the reporting year 2018-2019. I've also set out in, and do bear with me, I think it's important to set out these points to start with. In INSP 17 and INSP 18, those were letters from me to the council that indicatively a 5% buffer in terms of a 5-year land supply may be appropriate. That deals with whether or not, there has been evidence, a record of persistent under delivery in terms of NPPF 2012 paragraph 47. So in light of some uncertainty in terms of A5 infrastructure funding, the council set out potential options for a stepped housing trajectory. That was in NWBC 26A and NWBC 26B, and I then asked that for the additional local plan consultation that they select one to go for effectively, so that we have a definitive basis for considering a stepped trajectory. I've put what that was in INSP 5B, just for the purposes of clarity, so we don't have to flick between documents. Option 2 of in that document is that the trajectory goes from 203 dwellings a year between 2011 and the reporting year 2017-2018. It steps up and then steps up again, so that the final years of the plan are looking towards 775 dwellings a year. We have clarified, I had a point of clarification here, as we've dealt with in terms of site H15, correct me if I'm wrong, that the housing trajectory in NWBC 24 was indicative of what might happen beyond the planned period. There was a slight issue there in terms of the timescale of the plan of option 2 and of what is attributed to sites, but that has been explained. Now, if we move on to paragraph 20 of INSP 5B, there is a, that's where the council has set out what has been delivered in terms of gross and net, importantly net housing completions year on year relative to the requirement or the target, however it was expressed in the development plan that existed at that time. I would just point out that shows a sort of a different basis for looking at undersupply, given that the information, that second table under paragraph 20 of INSP 5B, looks at existing development plan targets, which were historically lower than what is proposed via the plan that we're examining. But as we discussed this morning, the strategic housing market assessment that informs this plan takes account of 2014 data, and so effectively therefore looks back to 2011 at what should have occurred during that period in order to meet the needs during that time. Can I just clarify then that the council accepts that the stepped housing requirement should be the basis on which any shortfall in terms of 5-year land supply should be calculated? So, sorry, let me say that again, just so it's very clear. When we're talking about undersupply and how a 5-year land supply is calculated, and I believe what I'm saying is consistent with the latest 5-year land supply monitoring report of the council, but that undersupply, if that has occurred, should be calculated relative to the plan's stepped requirement, not relative to any previous development plan target.
Yes, sir, because you can't look backwards and attach an undersupply to what's happened in the past. You've got to do that from the point forward, in my opinion. So it should be as of now, that is when you step up, and it's that does the undersupply, not looking backwards and adding it to the requirement that we had a few years ago.
Sorry, can I just clarify? In terms of no, that's I understand that, and I think it's intricate, isn't it? But there's a distinction between looking at historically what has happened and what applied in terms of the development plan, and looking at what is effectively undersupply, which is relative to what the plan as it stands says should occur. And so any undersupply should be calculated, to my mind, against what the step trajectory is for the plan. Mm-hmm.
Yes, I would say so, sir. So, but if I could also just explain just one other issue, that we use 203 as the figure in both options because 203 is in the adopted core strategy. So that's, I perhaps wrongly assumed that we should be using the 203 figure as far through the plan period as possible, because that reflects the adopted core strategy. But as you can see, for option 2, we have reverted to the 265, but only from 18-19. So that's as of the last monitoring year. So it wouldn't be. So I was trying to to get the 203 to align as much as possible with the adoption of this plan, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, I can see that. That's helpful in terms of explanation. If I just keep going through the kind of the premise to it, and then we'll get onto the discussion. So that's a helpful clarification that the stepped housing trajectory needs to be obviously logical. You can't alter history, and therefore that informs what the step trajectory is going forward to some extent. Now, clearly, I'll have to reach a view on whether that's justified and appropriate, etc. But I see that point. Under paragraph 21 of INSP 5B, I have flagged up, and I just want to check if that's the correct appeal. I remember discussion, and I can't quite pinpoint which document it is said in, but it seems like, and this is just thinking about the sort of the logic and the robustness of a stepped housing trajectory, since around 2015, and I've put the appeal, which I believe is the one 3136495. Please correct me if that is incorrect. The council has acknowledged that the core strategy requirement, which expresses as 203 dwellings per annum, was no longer up to date in terms of wider housing market evidence. Am I correct in that sort of occurring around 2015? And if I am, should therefore the stepped trajectory step up from that point, as opposed to maintaining 203, as you mentioned, through to 2018, 2019? So we're talking about some really quite intricate mechanics of calculating a step trajectory. I'll ask Mrs. Barrett that first, and then if anyone wants to come in. So yes, any views on whether there should be a change around 2015 in line with that appeal?
In terms of the 5-year housing land supply, that was to do with the development control system, and we'd lost an appeal, and it was said that we should be using the 2015 SHMA as the basis of our housing requirement. So yes, that is correct, but it would be from 16-17, 17-18, it'd be from the 16-17 year onwards that we would have done that from. So that, but going back to my previous comment, just what we were trying to do with the options though was to tie it in with the adopted core strategy. And that's where I think there is the difference between what we've done with the 5-year housing land supply in terms of the development control system and an appeal that we used, and now in the local plan process in trying to marry up the adopted plans and moving forward. So we're more than happy, sir, that if it was changed to 2016-17, 17-18, that it was 265, and if that makes it that we've used that historically and that's the way that we should be doing it, then happy with that.
Okay, thank you. That's very helpful. I mean, my indicative view is yes, that a step trajectory should of course take account of the core strategy, but also of what's happening in reality on the ground. And in that respect, if that has been accepted as a fact that things have become out of date around that appeal, and can I just check that's the right appeal reference? I mean, you don't have to answer now, but if in the light of discussion you think that's the wrong one, do let me know. That would make sense, as in at that point it was known that the true housing need figure was actually higher. So
yes, sir, and around that, I forget the dates exactly, so I do apologise here, but we also signed a memorandum of understanding with the Coventry and Warwickshire authorities, and that would have been around about that time as well. And that from memory, that was one of the reasons why the inspector at that stage was saying well, you've signed the memorandum of understanding, you clearly recognise that it's changed, and so that you should be using it.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, that's helpful. And this is the memorandum of understanding, which I believe now all the constituent authorities of the Coventry and Warwickshire housing market area signed up to, as was reflected in the CSWAPO letter, the representation to the examination. So, no, thank you. That's helpful clarification. Are there any hands up at this stage? Thank you, Kerry. I see no. I mean, I'm relatively confident now. I do see hands, but that makes sense. Okay. Mr. Sitch. Oh no, sorry, Dr. Doggett. I see your hand is up.
Whoops. Yes, thank you, sir. Yes. Can you hear me? Yes.
Yeah, very clearly.
Oh, I know it will come up this afternoon, but I would just like to cross comment on the with regard to the infrastructure, the SOGC A5 improvement report, which will come up. That states that the provision of road open to traffic will be in March 2028, which is well after the step change to 775 houses per annum on this option 2. So I just really wanted to flag up that there is quite a disconnect there, which I am sure we'll talk about after lunch. But just because we're talking about the option 2 going up from 390 to 775 in 2024-25 to 26, that's, even if everything goes well with the road and it goes according to plan, that is still a 3-year delay, with a lot more houses being built before the A5 is in reality improved significantly.
Thank you. Yes,
according to GC A5.
I think that's a point well made, and certainly, as you say, we will come on to that when we look at how proposed delivery tallies with infrastructure. So I will take that as a very helpful reminder to come back to that, unless the council want to talk to that now in any sense.
No, sir, that's fine. We'll speak about it later.
Okay, thank you both. Okay, I cannot see any other hands, and Kerry has helpfully confirmed that there are none. Thank you. We will deal with that as we go. So from my perspective, as an indicative view, I think the step trajectory should reflect not only what the previous development plan requirements were, but practically what was emerging as time went on in terms of housing needs. And it has been mentioned since 1617 onwards with relation to that appeal and to the Memorandum of Understanding. There was certainly a recognition that the wider context was important. So in my view, the step trajectory at that point should step up logically. On that note, turning to my second question, that is a meaningless thing to say. Paragraph 22 of INSB 5B. So I will share my screen again here, but I've noted in that paragraph that obviously the Birmingham Development Plan was adopted in January 2017, clarifying the extent of likely unmet needs in that administrative area. And clearly the plan we're looking at seeks to meet about 10% of that likely shortfall. My question, I suppose, is, from the adoption of the Birmingham Development Plan to reflect reality, should that stepped trajectory take account of that context? Now, what I will do, I'll put that question to the council first. But what I will do is show Sorry, when I look to the side, it's just to see if there are any hands. I will share my screen at that point. Here we go. Now, if you can all see that, I have put in the relevant years, the monitoring years in this document, the Council's option 2 trajectory. And then if, this is purely hypothetical, if that trajectory were to start at 203, to step up at some point to 264, to step up at some point to 454, taking account of the Birmingham Development Plan, and then working towards the same overall figure in the latter years to arrive at the same overall requirement. And that generates this graph here. Option 2 is a line chart showing the council's advocated step trajectory, which is quite steep around plan years 14. The alternative, if the assumptions in terms of the changing circumstances in 2015 and post-adoption of the Birmingham Development Plan, is a more stepwise fashion. So that was purely by way of illustration. I'm not suggesting that is what should occur. It was just to show, it was just to illustrate graphically my thinking. So turning back to the council, given that the extent of housing needs arising from the examination of the Birmingham Plan, should realistically the step trajectory take account of that from years 2017-18 onwards?
In my opinion, sir, no, because the situation is with Birmingham is that is such a massive big change for North Warwickshire to take on the additional 3,500 dwellings for the Birmingham area, that has been able to be achieved through this local plan and the allocations that we have within it. And that is, it should be starting as of now if you were going to go down that route rather than looking backwards, because for example, H7, they have not submitted a planning application because the plan is not yet adopted. So you can't look backwards again with that one until we're in a position that if we'd had an adopted plan, yes, a few years ago, then yes, that might have been the case. It would have been a lot easier, but I just don't see how, with such a big change, yes, we're boosting the supply of housing, but it's like a chicken and egg, isn't it? Until the plan's been adopted, we can't get those last chickens to lay their eggs, so to speak.
No, and I see your point, and if I can just play that back, so I'm absolutely clear, that is effectively the plan responds to that. If you factor that in too early, that undercuts the plan. Okay, thank you. Mr. Dittman.
Thank you, sir. Yes, and it was just to remind you both of the report from Mackintosh and Nathaniel Litchfield Partners on how much capacity North Warwickshire physically has in light of the infrastructure constraints, and that to backdate effectively the Birmingham shortfall to those years would not realistically reflect the ability, capacity, or availability of infrastructure to accommodate them. So we would effectively be penalised for accepting a figure in the past years for which we had no capacity to deliver and no local plan, obviously, at that time to deliver, which would be a little strange. So again, from the infrastructure issue and the capacity of the borough at that time anyway to accommodate it, I think we would probably resist. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. No, that's very clear. I can see some hands have gone up. I would just flag up that I think the point, Mr. Titman, you raised in terms of capacity is something we'll come on to in terms of infrastructure delivery, and is also raised in paragraph 34 of INSP 5B, which is down for this afternoon. So we can explore that then. Now, I saw I'll go to Mr. Ostenfeld first and Mr. Cox. So, Mr. Ostenfeld.
Thank you, sir. I think I've maybe jumped the queue a little bit, so I'll try not to steal any of Mr. Cox's pertinent points. But it's just an observation more than anything, sir, because I think ultimately the final sort of mode or the final operation of the step trajectory, I think, will ultimately be informed by this afternoon's discussions and looking realistically at the deliverability of the council's proposed allocations. But I would say one thing at this time, and I think it's helpfully illustrated by the screen that you just shared, sir, and I think we've made points to illustrate that as part of figure 1 of our submissions. From the outset, the council's trajectory has always been geared towards delivery at the end of the plan. It's very much backloaded, and you can tell by the way that this is illustrated, which shows delivery sort of reaching quite a significant peak towards the end of the plan. Now, that for us gives us quite significant concerns, not least because the council are presenting an ambitious strategy, which is very unlike whatever they've seen in the past, but it also sort of presents issues of deliverability related to market absorption, the ability for the council to actually come forward and bring forward the scale of allocations at a particular time. Now, presenting something which is stepped at a level which gradually eases them up towards that higher level of delivery is probably more likely to be achievable. And what I would say on the point of Birmingham is that I fully recognise the council's ambitions to deliver Birmingham's unmet need, and they're doing a lot more than other authorities. But clearly, we have to take account of that need when it arises. I note the point that they should take account of Birmingham's need from now, but they've known about Birmingham's unmet need and are committed to Birmingham's unmet need from a point of time earlier in the process. So surely when that commitment is made, it would make sense to account for that in the step trajectory. But sir, I think it's perhaps pertinent to come back to this issue and to how we deal with shortfalls after this afternoon's session. Thank you.
Thank you. Very clearly made points, and I agree that what we are looking at now is a sort of, if I can say it, theoretical exercise in what the requirement should be. But you're absolutely right that it needs to be informed, as Dr. Doggett has also rightly pointed out, by actual delivery considerations. So thank you for those points. Mr. Cox.
Thank you, sir. Just really to echo the comments of Mr. Ostenfeld. I mean, I just noted the council's position that they're concerned about such a big step change, but actually, in reality, this step trajectory is creating that big step change by pushing all of the development to the end of the plan period. I think the other thing just to be mindful of is the commitments that the council has made to a number of authorities, Coventry and Warwickshire, Tamworth, Birmingham, about meeting their needs by 2031. And I know that your trajectory, sir, was as a hypothetical one, but it ensured that the majority of those commitments would be met by 2031.
Thank you very much. Points clearly made. Does anyone from the council want to come back on those points at this stage? I mean, we will. I think possibly the point from Mr. Cox in terms of the timing of delivering housing relative to the agreements with neighbouring authorities is perhaps one to touch on, but we will certainly come back to the second side of the equation, if I can call it that, in terms of anticipated delivery relative to that requirement a bit later on. But any comments at this stage from the council on those points?
We have tried to make sure that we comply with the agreements that we've got, to make sure that we're delivering what we have set out that we would deliver. But as you've recognised and as the discussions have gone, it does require that a step change in the delivery of the infrastructure as well. And so the two do have to come in line in some way. And so from that perspective, I'm sure we'll come on to it this afternoon in greater detail.
Thank you. And I think the that discussion is really helpful for me in suggesting that paragraph 23 of INSP 5B, which is what is the most appropriate step trajectory, we will have to come back to that this afternoon. So I've put that down on my list for there. I mean, I understand the kind of the strategic context, the logic. We'll have a reflect on that over lunch, and then come back to that after delivery. Can I ask one particularly, and I will just check if there are any other hands up, one particularly technical question, I'm afraid. If I go back to NWBC 24 Annex H, I think, which is the, thank you, Kerry, the 5-year housing land supply situation up to 2018-2019. I see the shortfall in net additions to housing stock relative to the option 2 trajectory is given as 54. Presumably, just talking through the mechanics of how a 5-year land supply has been calculated, that 54, because in that 5-year land supply document, reference is made to going under the Sedgefield, I think, approach to dealing with any shortfall in the first 5 years going forward of the plan. Just to clarify that that has been divided by 5, added to the step trajectory, and then a 5% buffer added in terms of calculating a 5-year housing land supply. Just to clarify that.
I'm just bringing it up, sir, just to make sure it's open now.
Yeah, so it's just to be absolutely clear, because and I'm saying this because if we arrive at the position, say from 2016-17 onwards, that it would be rational, logical, and based on evidence to have a step trajectory that is higher, that shortfall, based on what we've previously discussed, changes.
Yes.
And therefore the calculation of the 5, so it's quite an important point, and therefore the calculation of the 5-year housing land supply changes. Now, there are various components to it, but I just want to, as an initial step, clarify that the way it's been done in the Council's 5-year land supply monitoring document, which I think is NWBC 24 Appendix H, what I see you've done is you've taken option 2 trajectory, step trajectory, looked at delivery relative to that, and then arrived at a shortfall. Is that correct? Of 54?
If I can point you to page 10 of that document, you'll actually see in Appendix A.
Sorry, I'm just heading there now.
That's fine.
Sorry for any clicks. What page was this, did you say?
It was page 10, sir. It's Appendix A.
So this is Annex H, page 10.
We've set out a table there, sir.
Okay, yeah.
And you'll see at the top of that, in the second set of columns, the figures that we've used in the step trajectory. And what we've used is actually option 1 in that, because of course we've moved things forward. So this hasn't. So we've used 203 up till 2019, 1924 is 300, and then 719 for 2433. So if there was a change in the step trajectory, then we would have to redo the calculation based on the new step trajectory. But what you can see then below is that we work out what the requirement should have been between 11 and 19, how many completions we actually had between that time, and there was a shortfall of 54.
Yeah.
So we add that 54 onto the requirement, because it's the requirement plus the shortfall, and then add on 5% buffer. And so that gives you a requirement for that period of 1632.
Sorry, I had myself muted. Yeah, that is as I understood it. I just wanted to be sure, because we talked about earlier looking at previous local plan requirements, previous core strategy, and before that requirements, that actually the approach the council has taken to calculating 5-year land supply is based on, well, it's option 1 of the trajectory, but it is based on that current trajectory. It looks at undersupply, applies that to 5 years, and applies the 5% buffer. We've talked about historic underdelivery previously in these hearings, and I don't particularly want to reopen that again, but that makes sense. So in terms of the methodology, that to me sounds correct. Okay.
If whilst we're on that table, sir, if I could just point, we've talked about the lapse rate, and that the table in here does include a lapse rate, but for some reason it's an annualised lapse rate rather than a lapse rate on the planning permission. So that is something that we would have to have a look at, or would need to be corrected in that table.
Yeah, sure. And I mean, I did see that, and I think it's a different way. As I saw that was a different way of expressing what 3% is, rather than saying it's 3%. So I think that is an important point for the council to obviously consider, but also to reflect when we talk about table 7 in terms of how those lapse rates are presented in terms of market functioning, subject to a main modification. Okay, that is.
You've put yourself on mute, sir.
No, that was. Thank you. That was conscious that time, but. Okay. So I've said that 23, paragraph 23 of INSP 5B, we're going to look at after we've considered delivery. If we move on then to question 24. Now, what level of flexibility? So I know there is a reference to a flexibility factor, and I just really want to explore this. I just want to explore this issue to clarify my and everyone's understanding. What level of flexibility in terms of overall housing numbers? So we're setting aside the 5-year housing land supply issue in the short term, and we're looking at the plan as a whole. What level of flexibility, excuse me, which is sometimes called headroom, should also be included to ensure that the plan's strategy is deliverable? If I look at the pie chart spreadsheet I showed earlier, which deals with the various components of that supply, it seems that the total figure, as I have it, of 9,769, if you add all those segments together, comes to more than 9,598, albeit fractionally, about 1.8% more. There has been some sort of rumbling points raised in the examination to date, and in terms of the additional local plan consultation, which recently happened, that there should be a suitable level of flexibility such that the plan can realistically deliver against its objectives. What is the council's position on how that flexibility would be achieved? And then I'll open the debate.
Okay, sir. The first thing to say is that we have a minimum housing figure, although because of the size of it, and as you already know, that we weren't too keen on having a minimum housing figure, but we will have a minimum housing requirement. There's more land allocated than the minimum requirement. We've got the reserve housing sites as well. We've got the windfall allowance, which we believe is quite conservative at 60 per annum. We've taken off a lapse rate for the planning permissions of 3%. And the areas that we've shown in the allocations, we believe are quite conservative as well in terms of the numbers going to be achieved in the allocations. So for some of the larger ones, we've done it at 60% net developable area. In other ones, it's 70%. We've generally used 30 dwellings per hectare as well. So there's flexibility there. So I think taking all those things into consideration, we do have an amount of flexibility within the plan.
Thank you very much. So that's a clarification as to the various ways in which the plan has effectively built in those assumptions without it being expressed numerically effectively. Okay, any comments on that issue in terms of flexibility? What is an appropriate degree of flexibility? I know this was raised in the ALP. I can see Mr. Austin Fell's hand's gone up.
Yes, thank you, sir. I think, and we'd sort of try and accord with what the council are trying to put across here, but there's a need to ensure that this plan remains not only sound now, but remains robust over the next few years so that it can endure any changes in supply, deal with any issues that might come along the way once we start looking at the strategic allocations and the build out of those. Building in headroom at this stage, or building in flexibility, I think is an important factor, because it ensures that we've got sufficient sort of capacity to deal with those issues. What I would say, and I'm just sort of thinking a bit further ahead here, is that the majority of the council's supply in terms of their allocations, and we're looking at some large allocations here, is due to align with the completion of the A5. So if we expect that this is from 2026 onwards, or perhaps later, as the new statement of common ground confirms, until that point, we're reliant on perhaps only a small cache of allocations and extant permissions. Now, were we to be faced with a position where this current plan lapses beyond its 5-year period and therefore becomes out of date in the context of the NPPF, I want to sort of work out what that sort of position would leave them in, and would that really be in the interest of a positive plan-led approach? And in that scenario, would the council still be able to deliver a robust supply of housing? Now, this has been dealt with in countless other examinations over the years, but I draw your attention, sir, to the Stratford Core Strategy adopted in 2016, which included a contingent of reserve sites. I know we're coming on to reserve sites later, but I think it's important to sort of draw upon this now, because ultimately, rather than just putting a buffer of headroom in there, I think this needs to be linked to a specific release of reserve sites that could come forward in the future should delivery factors indicate that they are necessary. And in our view, because there is such a significant gap between delivery in the next few years and when the council's expected large sites will come forward, there's a greater need to ensure protection of the local plan in those intervening years. So whilst I wouldn't say we need to sort of fall upon a particular figure, what I would say is that there needs to be greater emphasis on reserve sites to enable the council's plan to remain up to date. Thank you.
Thank you. And I think what I will certainly do, Mr. Austin Fell, is take those points when we come to paragraphs 31 and 62 of INSP 5B, as I just want to, in a similar vein, clarify that the trigger where those reserve sites would come into come into sort of being is clear, and that does go to ensuring an adequate supply. So I take those points. I've made a note that I will return to them in particular under paragraphs 31 and 62. May I take Mr. Cox now, and then I will ask the council for any views. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I am concerned that there's very little flexibility within this plan. As you say, the sort of overall figure on the supply side is 9,769, which is less than 200 dwellings above the minimum requirement. It only takes one of those large sites to have unforeseen difficulties and to perhaps start a year later, and all of that flexibility is lost. I think it's also worth looking at what other local plans in the area have provided in terms of flexibility. Not just in terms of headroom, but also in terms of the non-implementation rates, because it's another area of flexibility within the plan. I was Stratford, 10% headroom, Solihull emerging plan, over 10% headroom. The Wyre Forest local plan that's just been submitted for examination has 15% headroom plus additional reserve sites. And then on the non-implementation side, South Staffordshire had a 19% non-implementation rate, Tamworth, the neighbouring authority, 10%, Black Country 10 to 15%. So 3% is not that great. I think the other point I'd make is in relation to reserve sites as well. I mean, it's recognised that there are reserve sites that have been identified, but they would deliver less than 10% flexibility. And in comparison to the LPEG recommendations, which was for 20%. So on all fronts, I don't think there is a very generous level of flexibility within the plan.
Thank you. And if I may press you, Mr. Cox, what would you see as a reasonable, sorry, I've perhaps caught you on the hop, but what would you see as, in that context, a reasonable degree of flexibility, if you could put your finger on it?
I would have said 15 to 20%, including reserve sites. 15
to 20%, including reserve sites.
And I think it also relates to any risks associated with the plan as well. And a lot of the supply within North Warwickshire is predicated on the delivery of the A5 improvements.
Thank you very much. Okay, hand over to the council.
Okay, sir. Actually, if you take the amount of land that is being allocated within the plan and add that to the reserve housing sites, it's actually around about, and apologies for not having an exact figure, but it's around about 15% greater than the 6067 figure, which is the land that we need to require. So in my opinion, that we do have the headroom there if all of the reserve housing sites actually do come forward. And it's those reserve housing sites that we've put forward specifically to fill any gap within the housing requirement that we need, and also to give us that flexibility there. I mean, there are some unique issues with some of them, but they will hopefully be addressed, and those sites can actually come forward. So,
thank you. And I may be preempting Mr. Cox's question, but just in terms of, could you run me through that calculation again, please? The 15% greater than.
Yeah.
Is this because, as we've discussed in previous sessions, that a certain proportion of the site any particular site is considered as developable, as opposed to a certain proportion which is not, or have I misunderstood that? No.
No, sir. If you go to MM71, the amount of land to be allocated is 6067. That's the minimum amount of land that we need to have allocated in order to achieve the 9598 figure. So what I did was I've looked at the allocations, and this is probably where my figures slightly are not quite the same as yours, so I do apologise there. It's 6239 is what I have as allocations. And if you add on 794, which is the current reserve housing sites capacity, that gives you 7033. And I make that 15.9% greater than 6067.
Okay, thank you. So I've, sorry, just summarising that, excuse me. If you were to add the potential housing delivery from reserve sites, that would amount to 15.9% of what is required in terms of allocations in the round of what's been permitted and what has been delivered to meet 9598.
Yes, sir.
Okay, now Mr. Cox.
Just to clarify, sir, when I'm talking about a 15 to 20%, that would be on the 9598 figure. And in terms of the flex, I can't comment about land, but in terms of the numbers that are being bandied around, the 9769 is 171 dwellings above the 9598. And the reserve sites, the yield equates to 794. So that is less than 10%.
Okay, thank you. I think that's clear. Certainly, I'm clear on that. As in, there are an amount of reserve sites. I can hopefully do the maths in terms of how that relates to all the other figures, and I think it will then essentially fall to me to reach a view on whether the other flexibilities, if I can call them that Mrs. Barrett mentioned in terms of densities, etc., is sufficient as a whole to meet a kind of what is reasonable flexibility for the plan with reference to its intended objectives and whether that is deliverable. So I think I have heard all I need to on that, unless there are any other hands. Thank you for those points. I can't see any other hands. Okay, and they seem to be working, which is good. I will then move on to question 25, which of INSP 5B, which again we will defer to later. I think it would be good to finish a little bit before 1, so I can have a think and we can all get prepared for the next session on infrastructure viability and site delivery, although that will start no earlier than 2 in line with the programme. Paragraph 25 I put, is the stepped housing trajectory justified and consistent with the approach in the NPPF 2012? Now, we've talked about that a fair bit and I need to reflect on some things there. The question I had was, what tests should I apply in approaching that consideration? Now, clearly we've discussed one potential, which is whether the plan is deliverable in that, whether there's sufficient flexibility to achieve its aims. But I wanted to raise that in case anyone, including the council, had any points as to the tests that I should apply in assessing whether the trajectory is robust. Seems like that is a question for me. No one wants to comment on that. So I will take that away. Okay, so moving on to paragraph 26 of INSP 5B. Is it necessary for soundness to make specific reference to which houses sites would relate to meeting the borough's housing needs or contributing to meeting wider needs? Now, this has been raised by ALP 19, Tamworth Borough Council. I think this was raised in previous discussions as well, given the commitment in the core strategy and Indeed, in the plan, I believe that amounts to a total of 913 or 914 dwellings in relation to Tamworth. Is it necessary? The thing I'm questioning is it necessary for soundness that specific reference is made to certain sites or certain houses that are meeting that commitment, as opposed to generally housing contributing towards unmet needs arising from Tamworth Borough Council? Can I get the council's view on that, please?
It's always been our situation, sir, that we never want to identify a site for, say, Tamworth's needs or Birmingham needs or Coventry's needs. It is not something that we have ever wanted to pursue, because what we want at the end of the day is that it's a community that's part of the North Warwickshire Borough, and we don't want it to be seen as, oh, that's the Tamworth estate or that's the Birmingham estate. That is not the premise here. The housing numbers are part and parcel of our numbers, so they should be part and parcel of all the allocations that are within the plan. And I know that makes it harder for the monitoring side, but I'm sure there's ways that we can do that, or to proportion out the monitoring if we need to. But in terms of sites, we definitely do not want to actually have them highlighted as this is for a particular need. And if I can just highlight that I've been here for a very long time, but there's still an estate in Wood End that is referred to as the Newby estate, and that's been there for almost 30 years. And we just don't want that to be, because a lot of people saw that as the overspill from Tamworth, and we don't want that as we want the communities in North Warwickshire to be a community.
Thank you. Okay, does anyone else want to speak to that, or shall we adjourn until 2? Okay, thank you, that's very clear. Okay, I will, we're a bit early, but that gives us some time to think. So thank you very much for your contributions. There'll be time, and I have noted various things to come back to. There'll be time to pick things up when we return, but I will now adjourn the hearing. We will reconvene at 2 when we'll be talking about infrastructure. Now, I believe everyone, it's time to log off. Is that correct?
Yes, it is, sir. Yes, it's a new meeting invite for this afternoon session.
Brilliant. Okay, well, thank you very much, everyone. I see no hands up, so I will adjourn and we'll reconvene at 2 this afternoon. Thank you.